I'm Chris-Rachael, your Kitchen Overlord, back for day 2 of my South by Southwest challenge to make a video a day for a week, all relating to the Shire. Why's that? Because I wrote the Hobbit cookbook and I know a little bit about food from that time and place. So yesterday we talked about breakfast. Naturally, day 2, that means, what are we going to talk about? Second breakfast. Now, a lot of people have different interpretations about what second breakfast means because it's a mythical meal. Yesterday we were talking about real foods from the real world, and these will be real foods, but second breakfast is not something people ever actually ate. It's one of the things that he made up because having so much food would have been such an incredibly fantastical thing that people would relate to and long for at the time they were reading this, because there's food rationing going on, there's food shortages. This is as big a fantasy as dragons, is having a second breakfast. But I was thinking second breakfast wouldn't just be the same thing as breakfast all over again. That's kind of boring. What are you going to have for second breakfast? Well, you're energized from your first meal of the day. Maybe you want to go on a small adventure. Maybe you want to hop over the hedgerows and see what the Hobbit next door is doing. So you're going to want something you can pack with you that's going to be durable, that'll survive in your pack while you're hiking along, and will still be edible and not turn into a mush when you get there. For the 1890s, what does that mean? Hand pies. Not just any type of hand pies, short crust pastry dough hand pies. Now there's a difference between short crust pastry and what we think of as a pie crust. A pie crust is kind of it's more of a French sort of thing, and I don't mean that in a negative way. French food is awesome, but they're very light and flaky if you do them right, and if not, they're kind of chewy, but they're still pretty thin. It's not something you want to put in the back of your backpack and carry around all day. Short crust pastry, that is some durable stuff, especially if you roll it like a 1/4 inch, which is what I end up recommending. It's gonna last you. You can throw some of these suckers in your bag, carry them around all day, and unless you're carrying bricks in there, they're probably gonna be fine, as long as you crimp the edges down pretty solidly. So this, to me, made the most sense. They're also based on several different historical foods from that time and place. Cornish pasties, for example, are a more famous type of hand pie, but there were tons of hand pies, because really, you can put a small amount of ingredients inside a carb. The carb is cheaper. Bake those, fry them if you happen to have fat. You probably didn't if you're middle class or poorer, because fat's expensive, so you're baking them. And then have something that you can eat all day, something that might last, in fact, a few days if you're making a bunch of them at once. I wouldn't make a bunch of them at once these days because we're down with foodborne illnesses. They didn't really have the germ theory of disease, and you knew that things went bad after a while, but people died of food poisoning a lot. So you'd have a lot of meat things sitting out for a day or 3, and you would eat it anyway because, like I said, 2/3 of your income's going to food. Not great. Anyway, if you want to make yours that are not going to poison anyone, you can either eat them that day or refrigerate them. Short crust pastry doesn't really hold up that well to refrigeration. I think that it loses some of that crunchy hardness and gets a little soggier, and it just doesn't quite have as nice a mouthfeel. So if you're going to make meat ones, eat them all that day. Everything else, as long as you keep it with mostly vegetarian ingredients, you can leave sitting out. And that works really, really well with the Shire, because what do hobbits love? Potatoes and mushrooms. Potatoes, because they were one of the 3 New World foods that Tolkien decided to allow. Potatoes, coffee, and tobacco. And no, they weren't eating the tobacco. The man just really, really loved to smoke. And mushrooms, because, as he said, hobbits love mushrooms. This is an interestingly, historically accurate thing that's another fun detail. It's easy to forget that people used to actually forage a little bit all the way into the industrial era. If you lived in a village that wasn't too industrialized, which the Shire was based on, you would still have some wild spaces around it. And back then they weren't as protective over their children. I mean, they were very protective of their children, but there wasn't this idea that you can't let them go out by themselves. There wasn't as much stranger danger going on because you knew everybody in your village. Really, it took a lot of effort to get to a village in the middle of nowhere. No one's running off with your kids. So they would send their kids out, burn off some of that childhood energy, go hunt down some mushrooms. It's something they could do that would be useful to bring home. And for those of you that are like, whoa, mushrooms are dangerous, keep in mind, you would show them what to gather. Usually older children would be showing the younger children what to gather. And when you say, oh, mushrooms, how do you know the difference between the edible ones, the psychedelic ones, and the poisonous ones, because they come in all types? That's kind of like saying, how do you know the difference between how to use the various apps on your phone? It's one of those childhood skills that you just grow up learning because you're exposed to it constantly and you know it instantly when you recognize it. But somebody from the outside would go, whoa, this is all craziness, I don't understand. Pretty much anyone that has experienced foraging will tell you, once you learn it, it's really not that hard. It's foraging. So you send your kids out to get some mushrooms, you grab some onions out of the garden or out of a bag hanging on the wall, maybe if you've got some herbs, whatever. Cook all those in some butter and stuff them in your pie. You can leave that out for 2 or 3 days, it's totally safe. If you've got any sort of fruit left over from the previous nights, you can stuff them in your hand pie. Cornish pasties are kind of famous for having a 2-in-1 going on, where half of it would be meat and the other half would be dessert. So you kind of eat one end and then eat the other. I didn't personally make any of those because I feel that those take a bit more work and timing, a little more skill, giving the Cornish some credit for this, because your wet ingredients are likely to soak through a little bit more with the pastry crust, like I mentioned earlier, and you don't really want that, so I tried to stick with things that are all just one. It's a great thing to do if you're going to do a Hobbit party, though, because you can make a ton of them at once. With the pastry dough, short crust pastry is really easy and forgiving. You can put it in the fridge and reuse it the next day if you don't want to make all of them at once. And it's just not that hard. Just get whatever shape cookie cutters you want. Fill it with a couple tablespoons of things, really crimp the edges down, bake it, you are good to go. You can be super flexible about the ingredients. In fact, you can make it entirely vegan really easily if you want to substitute coconut oil for butter and things, which is something else that I recommend all throughout an Unexpected Cookbook, my Hobbit cookbook, is how to make vegan variations, which would be 100% historically inaccurate, but modern people like to eat too, so you want to make sure that there can be, you know, easy variations for folks. Really not much else to say about second breakfast. Just stuff that you can throw in your pack and have an adventure on. If you've got some comments about things that you think would make a great second breakfast, I would love to hear them. And I will be back tomorrow to talk to you about 11s.